Hello and thank you for joining me. Stay tuned after the end of this video for a special message about the future of cooking with Tristan. Today we are taking a look at falafel, a fried food loved by vegetarians and omnivores alike. But before we jump into the recipe, let's talk a little bit about this crispy dish. Falafel is a staple dish of Middle Eastern or West Asian cuisine, especially prevalent in countries of the Levant. They are thought to have originated in Egypt, but we don't have an exact date on when they first arrived on the scene. Because of falafel's massive popularity, the crispy fried balls of goodness can also be found well outside of their place of origin, showing up all over Europe, North America. From New York City to London, Paris, Berlin, it isn't hard to find a pita shop with a fryer full of falafel. Luckily for me, my current city of Copenhagen is also blessed with many great falafel and durum options, thanks in large part to Middle Eastern immigrants who helped to spice up the food scene here. And look, I love many of the classic Danish dishes I've encountered so far, but I really appreciate the flavor diversity that the shawarma shops bring to the harbor town. This way I can have my pickled herring on Monday and my spicy pita on Friday. But even with all the great options I have all over the city, I still really enjoy making falafel myself at home on occasion. It's fun to be able to spice them up exactly how I like, and I also just love knowing the process. So without further ado, let's pop into the kitchen. Falafel are made with chickpeas or fava beans, or in some cases a combination of the two. For my recipe today, I'm using just chickpeas. Chickpeas are also sometimes called garbanzo beans, so keep that in mind if you don't spot them right away at your grocery store. You will notice that I have here some dried chickpeas, and let me emphasize that it is absolutely essential to use dried beans here. I know that having to soak beans means you have to plan a day in advance, but it's easy as opening a bag and running some tap water. I don't care what Jamie Oliver says, you don't use canned chickpeas for falafel. So do it the right way and you won't be disappointed. All I do is get these chickpeas into a bowl and run enough cold water to thoroughly cover them, keeping in mind that you want enough so that as they absorb some of that water overnight, they will still remain covered. This is a good 2 cups, by the way, around a pound or half a kilo. Now just pop those in the fridge and wait until the next day. And honestly, if you were an early riser, you could soak your chickpeas first thing in the morning, and as long as they spent about 8 hours in the water, you could make them in the same day. Something to consider. Anyway, once my chickpeas have soaked, see how those beautiful little pearls have swollen up significantly? I strain them and run them under some cold water. I love green tea, but not so much bean tea. With our chickpeas soaked and rinsed, I'm going to pull out my food processor, and now we can get to the action. For aromatics, I have here a small white onion, which I have simply peeled and quartered, and 4 good cloves of garlic, also peeled. I pop those in the machine and let it whirl. Make sure they get chopped up nicely. Don't be hesitant to scrape down the sides of the bowl and run it again if necessary. Falafel often have a green tint to them on the inside, and that comes from the parsley. I have here half a cup of chopped parsley, but feel free to play around with the amount. Some places make super green falafel, while other places are just slightly speckled with greenery. You could also consider incorporating a bit of cilantro if you like. Once you've tried the traditional way, you might enjoy trying some different styles that exist out there. Quick side trip on that point. This is a Lebanese spot that is considered one of the best places to get falafel in the city, and they have several varieties to choose from. They are all great, but I really like the spicy variation in the Arabic spice blend version. The dry oregano really sings. Something to keep in mind for your second batch. With my aromatics pulsed up, we now go in with the chickpeas. At this point, I start the process of breaking up the chickpeas by pulsing the machine, as you can see, running the power on for short bursts before killing the power. The chickpeas are starting to break up, but I still have my spices and seasoning to add, so I don't want to go too crazy yet. On that subject, don't worry about when you add the spices in the blending process, beginning, middle, or end. It doesn't really matter, as long as they are fully mixed by the end. My spice blend is pretty classic. I have 2 teaspoons of cumin, 1 teaspoon of coriander seeds, and a few loose dried chilies. In most cases, when I'm using spices, I like to toast them before adding them into a recipe. That means I get a small pan or pot, put it over medium heat, and add my spices until their fragrance becomes strong, which usually only takes 30 seconds to a minute. You could also toast your spices in a hot oven. Either way, once they are smelling good, I pop them into my coffee grinder turned spice grinder and pulverize them. Now they go into my falafel mix. I'm also adding in a good teaspoon and a half of salt. And for some perhaps unexpected items, I have a teaspoon of baking powder and a rough tablespoon of chickpea flour. The baking powder helps keep the falafel fluffy and aids in the crispiness of the outside. You will sometimes see baking powder show up in the breading ingredients in fried chicken recipes for the same reason. As for the chickpea flour, it acts simply as a binding agent. It isn't technically necessary, but a good thing to keep in mind if you later find your falafel struggling to hold their shape when forming. With all the spices, aromatics, and seasoning added, I begin pulsing the machine again. You can see the transformation unfolding. It's important not to simply run the machine continuously, or else the bottom of the mix will be overly pulverized while the top remains chunky, especially if you have a stronger machine than this one here. Take breaks to check in on the mix, scrape down the sides, or maybe give the machine a good shake. My mix is still pretty coarse at the top, so I'm going to run it a bit more. For my preference, this mix is now looking pretty good, but the real test is, will it hold its shape? Grab a little handful and give it a squeeze. Does it hold together more or less, or immediately fall apart? Don't be afraid if you see a little liquid fizzing out when you squeeze. The chickpeas absorbed a lot of water, plus there is also water in the onions. You wouldn't want an overly dry mix. Mine passes the shape test. If yours falls apart easily, consider running it in the machine for a bit more. A more finely ground mix will hold together more easily. And remember, you can also see if adding a spoon or so more of chickpea flour helps to bring it together. I trust you will get there. Now we get the mix out of the food processor and into a bowl, and it's time to shape. There are many ways to do this. For me, I like to go the disc route, little falafel hockey pucks, if you will. I take a bit of the mixture in my hand. I sort of cup that hand to create a divot and use my other hand to pack the mix against my palm and the curvature of my thumb, as you can see. Nothing fancy here, I'm just feeling it out. Then I will usually flip it and repeat the process to make sure it is mostly smooth all the way around. And that's that. I'm eyeballing the amounts here, but if you want to really lock in your size consistency, you could use an ice cream scoop or a small measuring cup to portion out your mix. In restaurants, the chefs actually have a special scoop to form their falafel, as it would be impractical to do such large quantities by hand. This is one of my favorite spots in the city, where they were nice enough to let me behind the counter to film the process. See how they scoop a bit of the falafel mix on, and then use a spoon to make a slightly conical form. Quick and efficient. Although you probably don't have the skill and the experience like the pros here, don't let this part of the process stress you out. Find your zen, and like the potter throwing clay on the wheel, trust your hands. You are human after all, not a falafel factory. With our falafel shaped and on a plate, it's time to fry. I'm shallow frying mine in a pan over medium-high heat, but you could certainly use a deep fryer if you have one set to 180 Celsius or 350 Fahrenheit. Just be careful as you set them in the basket so they don't break. I've got a basic frying pan here, and I've added maybe a half an inch of neutral oil, something like corn, soybean, vegetable, or grapeseed oil. I let that oil heat up on the flame for a few minutes, then to test to see if the oil is ready yet, I drop a couple little bits left over from the mix in. As we can see, that sizzles and bubbles nicely, so I know it's hot enough to go in with my falafel. If I didn't see any sizzling or bubbling, I would want to give it a few more minutes to heat up. Notice that I drop the falafel in as gently as possible. I have restaurant hands, so I'm not afraid to get close to the oil. But you can also use a fork or a spatula to lower them in a more safe way. I'm just making a small batch now, but you could certainly load the pan up with more. When we see that the bottom of the falafel are turning a nice golden brown, we go in for the flip. Again, I'm pretty nimble and have fingers that can take a bit of heat, but you could also just use 2 forks to make sure the flip goes smoothly. Because this is a vegetarian dish, we don't need to worry about internal temperature. We just go by the visuals. When they are a beautiful golden brown all over, we know they are ready Freddy. Just lift them up and out of the oil and onto a wire rack to set for a bit to cool slightly. And just look at that. A really deeply crispy outer layer. Maybe you can hear me taking a crunchy bite there. And a nice light center, fluffy and ringing out with the aromatics and spices. We have taken the humble chickpea and truly elevated it. These are so nice, let's go down to the fountain and do some glory shots. Falafel are great in a pita, but I tend to prefer them on their own or on top of a wide variety of salads. Here I have a quinoa and carrot salad as a little nest. And then we just lay in our falafel. And of course, a yogurt or tahini-based sauce would be great here. As would a nice hot sauce. Who's ready to eat? Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to falafel. I'm no expert, but I certainly have a deep appreciation for this dish, and I hope you give it a try. And a big thanks to the folks at Street Food 108 for letting me get a close-up look at the falafel shaping process. And concerning the big news with regards to cooking with Tristan, the video you just watched will be the last one you see of me in that kitchen, because Sina and I have now moved. We found out last minute that there would be some major and disruptive construction happening on the building for almost half a year, and felt it would not be a great place to stay anymore, especially on the 5th floor close to the roof, which is being completely ripped off. I really love the view from that kitchen, but now I look outside and mostly all I can see is the scaffolding and a suspicious-looking pigeon. While I am saying goodbye, it will still remain a special place in my memories. That kitchen was a place I took comfort in while I waited anxiously for many months for an answer from the immigration authorities. While not being able to legally work, this is the grill I used to try and get a barbecue side hustle going, selling pulled pork to friends while I waited for permission to start my real job in Denmark. And of course, that kitchen is where Cooking with Tristan began. A project spurred on by a general sense of cabin fever, a long-time love for making video projects, and a desire to create something wholesome and informative like my favorite programs on public television. And what have we accomplished? Well, I've certainly done a lot of talking, some might say rambling, but hopefully you have enjoyed the journey so far and the food that gets made in between all that talking. And we have Brian to thank, of course, for the great increase in polish and professionalism that comes with his editing. Thanks, mate. I hope you stay with us as the road goes ever onward, clicking subscribe if you haven't already. My new kitchen is pretty nice, and I'm looking forward to all the great projects that are sure to come out of there. As always, clicking that like button is appreciated, and comments and questions are encouraged. So, see y'all in the new kitchen. Cheers.